welcome to The Critical Social Worker, a revolutionary storytelling podcast. This is episode 31, and we'll be participating in a profound discussion on psychedelic pathways with Doug Finkelstein. I'm your host, Christian Ace Stettler, and this morning, I am here with my co-host, August, and we're recording from my office at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, just below the Arctic Circle. And I'm going to go off script real quick, because something funny happened. August has asked me to receive her help with the pronunciation of her last name, and I kept putting her off, and she just asked me 5 minutes ago, and then I think we had a technical difficulty, and so I'm going to ask you right now, August, how do we pronounce your last name? How do we pronounce your last name, August?
Abu, like the monkey on Aladdin, and then Cassis, Abu Cassis.
Abu Cassis.
Yes.
All right, well, I'm happy to be joined here by August Abu Cassis. Hold on one second. We're here at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, just below the Arctic Circle. Although cold compared to most of the rest of the world, it's actually been relatively warm here in Fairbanks for the onset of November. Typically, we'd be well on our way to the frigid zone, with temperatures often plunging below zero, sometimes like 20 below by this time of year. So we're a bit lucky. It's been, hovering right around freezing. Had a nice warm Halloween with no gloves. But climate patterns are shifting, and the impacts of global warming are felt even in these remote, icy reaches. Now, on a more personal note, my family and I recently embarked on a new adventure. We moved into a home a bit outside of town here in Fairbanks. Fairbanks is already kind of off the grid. It's a city for real, but it's still kind of a city in the middle of nowhere. I shouldn't say in the middle of nowhere, but in the middle of the Alaska wilderness, the Arctic wilderness. So we got this little town, or this little house outside of town, like about, 15 miles outside of town. No water. Water's delivered by a tank. And every aspect of our daily lives has turned into a testament of the resilience and the beauty of simplicity. But with this rugged lifestyle comes some wild encounters, and I mean that literally. And I know I always shared when I was in Juneau, I would share, the marine wildlife that would come by. Now we're in the middle of the forest, and I've been out exploring outside the house. And I noticed a very large set of canine tracks coming through our yard in the fresh snow. And I noticed this 4 nights in a row. There were the same tracks going straight through. And at first I thought it might be a really big dog, but the more I looked, the more I realized that the tracks had a wild edge to them. They were straight, purposeful. Usually if a dog comes into a yard, they meander around, circle around, sniffing things, taking a leak on the trees. So it didn't seem like it was the behavior of a domestic dog. And then I found some poop, or I guess you'd call it scat. And it was filled with hair and bone fragments. And there was a little bit of blood, like it ate like a mouse or a squirrel or something very small. I know that a wolf needs more than a squirrel or a mouse to survive, but it definitely wasn't the remnants of kibbles or dog food. So I'm suspecting that we might have a wolf passing through, but I'm no expert on the tracks, so perhaps it's a really large coyote. While some might consider a wolf cruising through their yard with young kids a bit nerve-wracking, and I think others here in Alaska would want to kill the wolf, I don't fall into either of these camps. Something that I've kind of reflected on this podcast over time is the relationships that I try to create with the natural world. And I respect the wolf, and I look at them as distant relatives that we were probably much closer to in the not-so-distant history. And anyway, I hope to learn something and maybe even forge a connection with the animal that might be a wolf, and any others that choose to visit our home and my family. Anyway, I think I'll set up a camera this weekend and see if I can find out what's prowling around during the midnight hours. And despite the impending cold, dark winter, this really feels like a grand adventure for me and my family. The Arctic wilderness is stark, challenging, yet I say this with utmost seriousness. It's profoundly beautiful. When I look out my window, even when I'm at work now, but even when I have a Zoom meeting or something and I'm posted by the window and I see the reflection in the back, it's just such a beautiful place being in the forest out here. So yeah, we're gearing up for the start of winter. I guess a winter of discovery, and I must admit I do miss the warm shores of Hawaii from which we moved. But hey, from tropical beaches to icy tundra, life is nothing but an adventure. Well, like I said, I'm here with August, and I've been very happy to work with August in preparation for this episode, and I'm even more happy that she's here with me in the office this morning. Although we're on different screens, she's right here with me, and usually we're all via distance. So I'm very happy to have you here this morning, August. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem. And you're from Fairbanks, right?
Yes, born and raised.
Yeah. How was it growing up in a place like this?
It was different, but I had a lot of great experiences.
Yeah, right on. Well, we're happy to get down to it, but there's some things we got to cover first, and including we want to introduce Doug. So I was wondering if you might formally introduce Doug for us, August.
Okay, sure. Doug Finkelstein is the Executive Director of an Empathic Society, a nonprofit providing integration support to psychedelic service organization. He is formerly the Chief Empathy Officer of Empathic Health, a psychedelic integration peer support community. Doug worked in the finance industry for 4 years until his first
Psilocybin.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
No worries.
Journey, and shockingly realized he no longer wanted to work in finance. His life path led him more to a plant medication experiences and connections with lovely people who share his approach to life, as well as his commitment to approving integration for psychedelic journeys.
Yeah, right on. And I can't wait to get down to talk to Doug. I've been waiting to talk to Doug for a long time.
Same.
And so I'm very thankful that he is here, finally, to speak in person. And but like I said, there's a couple things we got to cover real quick, so we're going to run through it. And the first thing I wanted to say real quick is the Critical Social Worker podcast is supported by the Social Work Department at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. However, we want to be clear that any opinions expressed on this podcast, whether by the host, my co-host, our guest Doug, or any of the listeners calling in, they don't necessarily reflect the values of the Social Work Department, the College of Liberal Arts, or the University of Alaska Fairbanks as a whole, or any other affiliates. The opinions and ideas shared belong to the speaker alone, and that's important. If you don't like something that one of us says, because we can be opinionated, especially we got to some a controversial topic of psychedelics. So if you don't like what we say, take it up with the individual during the podcast, or email me. You can reach me at Stettler, Castettler, @alaska.edu. All right, August, you mind sharing our mission statement real quick?
All right. The Critical Social Worker podcast unfold unique stories and diverse perspectives to foster critical dialogue, empathy, and understanding for all listeners through storytelling grounded in social work values. We aim to change ourselves and the world around us one story at a time.
All right, and one of the underlying themes of that mission statement is obviously the idea of telling stories. And we here at the Critical Social Worker, we believe that each individual is multi-layered with unique life experiences, and we want to help unfold some of these layers through stories that we can learn and grow from, stories that help build critical consciousness. I want to give a quick shout out to the UAF social work program. Just in a nutshell, it's a badass program. You get a lot of care, you get a lot of attention, you get access to indigenous paradigms, indigenous people, indigenous cultures. Like I said, you have a staff that's caring, attentive. You'll get more attention here than you would anywhere else. We're one of the top-rated online BSW programs, and one of the best parts of it is the affordability of the tuition. You can receive in-state tuition for the online program, which is affordable in-state tuition, and you can get that from anywhere, whether you're in rural Alaska, Anchorage, Fairbanks, or whether you're in Honolulu, Hawaii, or Japan. You can get it from anywhere. So if you're interested in joining us for a Bachelor's of Social Work, just look us up on Facebook, UAF Social Work, or you can just Google UAF Social Work and it'll take you right to your page, or you can reach out to me, like I said, at castettler.alaska.edu. And just one more thing I want to run real quick. If you like the social worker, the best way that you can help us out is to support us is just by following us everywhere, whether that's Apple, Spotify, Podbean, YouTube. Like us, leave a comment, leave a review. That's the best way that you can support us right now. And that's it for now. I think it's time that we should get this conscious party started for real. Hey, yo, everyone, gather around. It's story time. Brought to you by the University of Alaska Fairbanks, Department of Social Work, and a Conscious Party Productions. You are listening to The Critical Social Worker, a revolutionary storytelling podcast.
A conscious party.
Revolutionizing our minds.
Elevating our consciousness.
Changing our worlds.
Your story.
My story.
Our story.
All right. Well, welcome officially to The Critical Social Worker, a revolutionary storytelling podcast. I'm your host, Christian Ace Stettler, and I'm happy to be joined by my co-host, August. And we are beyond thrilled to have our very special guest, Doug Finkelstein, with us today. And the title of today's dialogue is From Finance to Psychedelic Empathy, a Journey with Doug Finkelstein. And this topic resonates deeply with the ethos of our podcast and what I believe should be an ever-evolving revolutionary discourse in social work. I want to remind the audience, if you're tuning in live, that you're very much a part of this discussion. Feel free to pop in with any questions that you have or comments in the chat box, and we'll do our best to address them. And if you want to engage in the dialogue or you want to ask a question in person, please put in a call-in request and join us live. And real quick, before we jump in with Doug, I can't help but reflect. I've been thinking about this approach in this episode for a while, but I can't help think and reflect on the changing landscape of psychedelics. When I grew up, psychedelics were hugely stigmatized. I mean, I'm not even going to go through it, but it was just like this, dangerous, esoteric thing that, might bring impending doom if you do it. It was highly frowned upon, especially where I grew up in Utah. So there's a myriad of successful studies going on right now, or that have went on in the last, decade or so. There's trials, there's programs, research, clinical trials, everything. There's a growing acceptance. You hear it talked about more and more in the mainstream. But despite all this, it still feels a tad bit rebellious, almost nefarious to be discussing psychedelics in a public forum, especially when affiliated with the university that I work at. It's almost as if we're whispering about the forbidden fruit in the academic orchard, all the while knowing that the fruit has the potential to nourish minds and heal the soul. And it's humorous in a way, yet I think the matter at hand is pretty important. So Doug, how are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. And thank you, August, for the wonderful introduction. And Ace, I really enjoyed the ongoing story with the wolf in your backyard. I recently discovered that wolf is one of my spirit animals, and that led me to, I happen to have my journal next to me, draw a wolf that ended up being the first thing I see every time I open my journal, which has helped me to get in touch with that spirit animal part of me. So interested to see how that develops.
Yeah, right on. Where are you at? I know you're on the West Coast, but where are you?
I'm in Redondo Beach in Los Angeles.
Oh, Los Angeles. Well, that's a stark contrast to here in Fairbanks, Alaska.
A little different.
Yeah, I was at Daniel Mate on a couple weeks ago, and he was in New York City, so same thing. I felt like it was just a huge contrast to where we're at. Well, Doug, I was thinking that we could get started off with some storytelling, if it's all right with you. And I was wondering, because you have such a profound story that, has some significant events and significant things that happened that changed your trajectory to where you ended up going in your life. And I just wondered if we could start with that. You said you went from finance to having a psychedelic journey, and that led you to create Empathic Health. And, maybe we can just wander down that road and see where it takes us.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really started before I was working in finance. When I was 13, I started taking Propecia, this chronic medication for hair loss, a once-a-day pill, and I was very self-conscious about my hair. All the men in my family go bald, brother, father, grandfather, everyone. And then, I'm 13, self-conscious about it. Family friend says, oh, there's this pill you can take, you'll keep your hair. And I'm like, awesome, that's all I got to do? Like, cool, sign me up. No discussion about the side effects and what comes with taking, this foreign hormone and putting it into your body every day. So I started that. I was 13, and I was on it for 10 years until I was 23. And I probably knew around the age of 17, 18 that it was having some physical, mental side effects, but I wasn't ready to stop taking it. I still very self-conscious about my hair, probably even more so now, because I thought if I stop, there's the chance my hair falls out in the next week, and am I ready to deal with that? No. Not as a college kid and teenager going into my 20s. So I stayed on it through college, and then I ended up, my first job out of college was working in finance in New York City. And it was when I was 23 that it eventually got to the point that I decided I wanted to look more into this and see, are there other people that are having the same experience that are on this drug? And I found a few interesting things. One, I found a nonprofit that is set up to raise awareness for the horrible side effects of this drug, which is still given out like candy. It's one of the drugs that's in the HIMSS package. You may have seen advertisements for that. And I also found a online forum community of people talking about their side effects, and reading some of the experiences of other people, I realized I do not want to stay on this drug. What is the point of having my hair if these are the things that I am partially experiencing, and some of the more severe ones potentially going to experience if I stay on this? So it was really the day after I read those stories, I quit the drug, and it was about 6 months later I meditated for the first time, and I view it as kind of, that was like how long it took to kind of flush my system. And that first meditation was 5 minutes laying down on my bed. I think I fell asleep, but it was the start of really a inward spiritual practice. So that continued to develop, and I started to really, with the combination of those two things, no longer being on that drug and having a meditation practice, became way more outgoing and energetic and showing up in my relationships, and really just enjoying life and feeling like myself again for the first time since maybe I was 13. And eventually, one of the new things I wanted to try, now that I wanted to try everything that I couldn't be bothered with the previous 10 years, was psychedelics, and specifically mushrooms. And that was 2 years later when I was 25. So I more or less had the opinion government and media put out there that psychedelics are for hippies, and you're going to jump out of a building if you even talk about them, all the stuff he talks about is. And I knew that was obviously bullshit. But I didn't really know what this experience would be like, and I wanted to hear from real people what are psychedelics, why do people take them, why are they such this hot button topic. So did my own due diligence, research online, found more community forums of people sharing their experiences, and some of them were great, and some of them were great in the sense of could tell that they were legitimate, sincere, and some of them were like, this feels like fear-mongering and lying, and it was tough because websites that were built for talking about psychedelics looked like they were made by a 12-year-old in the 80s. They're very dark webby, sketchy. You don't know if you're talking to a 15-year-old troll or a doctor that's been studying psychedelics for 40 years. So eventually I went through enough of those. I felt I had a pretty solid picture of enough of a picture to have my first experience and feel comfortable. So I did exactly that. I went into nature with a small group of friends during the fall in New York. We had an isolated cabin, and it was a wonderful experience. And I immediately felt this, like a coming home sensation that, these mushrooms and these plant medicines were always part of me, and it was like seeing an old friend. And pretty soon after that experience, I realized I no longer wanted to work in finance, which is a shocking revelation. I'm not sure if the sarcasm comes through. I'm somewhat monotone, but I had that realization, and I decided I wanted to find something I was more passionate about that felt like I was contributing more to the world. So I didn't know what that was. I decided to go to graduate school to take the time to figure that out and explore what was out there. So I decided to go to UCLA and get my MBA there. And I moved across the country. My whole family is on the East Coast. It felt like a good kind of renewal and next step in my growth. It just felt right. So during the 2 years at UCLA, getting my MBA, trying to figure out what I want to get into. MBA programs really funnel people into banking, consulting, and tech positions, and all those felt like finance with a different name. So I knew I didn't want to do that, but I was interested in what other kind of niche things might pique my interest. And in the meantime, every 4 months-ish is when I'm kind of due for my mental health reset. And very similar to that first experience, I'll gather a small group of friends and have a in nature, off the grid experience. And it's kind of like my recalibration, mental health reset. So after my first year of school, still didn't know what I wanted to do. I realized that after all of these mushroom journeys, I was always excited to talk about what happened for each of us and how we were going to bring those learnings into our lives, and got mixed feedback from the people that I was journeying with on that. But I knew, I was like, there's got to be other people that are as, invested in these practices as I am. So I had the thought, like, there's not really a good place for people like me to communicate out there. I've seen the power of community online through the one I found for that drug I was on, for community sharing psychedelic experiences that was a bit difficult to navigate. I thought it would be awesome if there was a above board, real people, guaranteed, quality-centric place for people to talk about these experiences and share perspective and feedback and opinions, what works for them, what doesn't, resources, all the different things to help other people figure out what's next in their spiritual journey. So that was the idea for Empathic Health. And then I spent my second year of business school taking community building courses and meeting other people that would be interested in such a community. Then we launched it a couple days after I graduated in 2021, and managed that community for the last 2 years and change. And then in June, I stepped away from the community, ironically enough, for mental health reasons. Managing community, as I'm sure we'll talk about, is a very large job. And since then, a nonprofit has spun out of it. That's an Empathic Society. And we do consulting for wellness organizations. So we help them improve their offering for whoever it is they service. So we've worked with a couple nonprofits where we are helping a nonprofit that helps veterans get access to ayahuasca retreats for PTSD, build out a community for their veterans. We're helping a nonprofit that helps with accessibility for ketamine-assisted therapy, build out their integration program for their members. We've worked with a few individuals that are on their own path, helping them figure out what's next, as well as a psychedelic society to help them bring their people together more frequently. So we are really open to helping any organizations that are most likely really busy focusing on their one thing, whether it's a retreat focusing on that weekend of their retreat, or a psychedelic society focusing on their policy initiatives, to be able to offer more to their people to keep them connected and growing.
Yeah, right on. And so those that are listening live and then those that are listening later, where can they, if they're listening to this and they say, I want to look it up, did they go to the empathic.love? Is that where they would go?
Empathic.love, that's where we're at.
Empathic.love. Okay, so go there and check it out if you're listening in. I want to back up just a little bit and then we'll continue along this line. But I want to set the stage for where we're at with psychedelics, where we were at, where we've come from, and where we're at. I think that not everyone is familiar with that. So, I mean, today you have people like Michael Pollan writing major books about, best-selling books about it. Dr. Carl Hart had one. You've got like people like Joe Rogan talking about it quite often on his podcast. And a multitude of other, it's coming from everywhere at this point. And so I mentioned earlier that it almost feels a little bit nefarious still, even though I know it's not. It still feels a bit that way coming from my background. And, how did we get, I guess, let me back up a little bit. Why do you think that we have this so much stigma, or why do you think we came from such a stigmatized perception of psychedelics? Just the word psychedelics, right? I think in many people it haunts them with visions of tie-dye shirts and hippies and hallucinating and doing all sorts of wild stuff. And I get that part of that was probably from the Timothy Leary stage in the 70s and whatnot. But do you have any insight on that? You've been into this for so long. Why what's your interpretation of the, why it's so highly stigmatized? Because I don't know, I'm not an expert on it, but from my perspective, there's plenty of, especially today, there's plenty of research that you can look at that shows the positive or the beneficial aspects of how psychedelics can help. There's books out there, like I said, Dr. Carl Hart has one, Michael Pollan has one, but like I said, at the same time, it still holds this stigma. Why is that?
Yeah, I think we know the answer, and the government doesn't even lie about it. They made it a number one priority to make sure this is what happened. There's recordings of very high-ranking officials saying, yeah, we're targeting the hippies, like this is our number one priority. DARE program, the fact that even though we know everything we know now, and surprisingly, most of the research around plant medicine is from the 70s, before they decided to do this war on drugs. And then obviously it all stopped. And so I think, to answer your question directly, that's where the stigma comes from, because most of the people alive today grew up with some portion of the DARE brainwashing. There's some crazy PSA ads you can see from the 70s and 80s of what'll happen if you take LSD and all that nonsense. So it feels to me it's pretty obvious that it was the government's intention to make people feel that way, and in a lot of ways they succeeded. And I think the even more proof of that is the fact that all of these are still Schedule I substances. And if you look at David Nutt, I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, he used to be, I don't know what the name of the role is in England, but it's the equivalent of like one of the most prestigious medical professionals in the government. He did a study and he posted the results, shared the results, and the graphic that sticks out that you can find online is how dangerous all different substances are: alcohol, cocaine, heroin, LSD, mushrooms, MDMA, everything, and how dangerous they are to yourself and how dangerous they are to others. And bottom of the list, mushrooms, MDMA, ketamine, ayahuasca, all of the plant medicines, just not dangerous. It's literally impossible to overdose on mushrooms. It won't be pleasant, but you cannot die from it. And that's not the case for anything else. And these things grow in nature. There's a reason the earth grows them. And there's some evidence to show how important they were in our evolution. Joe Rogan talked about I'm blanking on his name, but there was one professor that analyzed the Dead Sea Scrolls for like 20 years. And his conclusion after all that research was that Christianity was actually a mushroom organization, and the sacrament was mushrooms. And then they got not ostracized. What's the word I'm looking for? What happened because they were communing with source with these plants, and that kind of was the how they got victimized there. So he also said, you mentioned like the Garden of Eden just passingly, that it likely wasn't an apple. It was just red is what they called it. And there were red mushrooms that had psychedelic properties around that area, around that time period. So there's theories that that's really what it was, which is interesting. And the ties to God, to a source, is interesting as well. So a bit off topic there, but to bring it back, I think it's very obvious why humanity struggles with these substances, because people in power have decided that's how they want it to be and continue to want it to be by not taking them off of Schedule I. And that's at a juxtaposition with all of the evidence that these are natural substances, that they're not harmful, that they have a rich history. Indigenous communities have been using them for generations, thousands of years. So those are my thoughts on that.
Well, let's unpack it a little bit more just for a second. So, I'm sure you've heard this joke before, this tale that, people say, well, if you wanted to make America a better place, you should just lock up all the politicians and give them psychedelics or something, and they wouldn't be able to act that way anymore. But I guess the thing that I still can't connect the dots on, I mean, I pretty much for the most part get it, but I just can't quite connect all the dots is, why, I mean, we say that that's exactly what the government wanted, but why do they want that? Are you saying that the government might not want people to be happy and explore their consciousness and liberate themselves, liberate their minds and their hearts? Is that what you're saying?
Whether they realize it or not is a different question, but I think it's the reality of what plays out. They might mean well, but that's not what happens, as we can all see with what's going on in the world around us, which is not the reality of the world we live in. So whether they truly want that or not, I don't know. I do think that when you work that hard to get into power, you want to keep that power. And there's kind of a bit of natural selection for, if you care enough to work that hard to get into power, you're someone that won't relinquish that power. So if there is a substance or substances that allows people to have their own direct connection with their true self and source and God, you don't want them to have that, because then what do they need you for in power? They've got their own, higher self telling them what's real and what's not.
Well, so the landscape has obviously changed, especially I don't even have a time frame, the last 2 decades at least. What happened? Why has it changed? What's changed to make it more acceptable? I think part of it, from my perspective, is just, there's more access to different sources of information with the internet, and so like I might not have had access to you, 20 years ago, but now you and I have access to each other. So what do you think? What changed? Why are people writing books about it, talking about it on podcasts? You have even prominent people saying that, Mike Tyson, and I guess he's not the best example. There's plenty of people that say that they go to South America and participate in ayahuasca ceremonies and whatnot, and they speak about it openly. And there's not as much stigma as there used to be, for sure. What changed?
Yeah, I think you're exactly on it. The internet's huge, access to information. If we were doing this, which we wouldn't be without the internet, if we were doing this over a phone, I would have no way of knowing that there were ayahuasca retreats in South America and Central America that are perfectly legal that I could go experience. And even now with this information, I'm going to just randomly guess. There's no science behind this guess, but I'd say over 50% of people in the US probably don't know that they could legally go do ayahuasca in South America or Central America, or what ayahuasca is. So even with that information, there's still a big difference in people having it and knowing about it. So before it, it's got to be 90-something% of people no clue about these, what they do, how important they are to indigenous communities, how they literally built their societies around their shamans, their high priest or priestess. So I think that it's information, knowledge, access, and then money. The fact that anyone can spin up a company that's going to have the next big psychedelic drug and get millions in financing, and eventually they think make a ton of revenue, and then become a public company and whatever, all that stuff. So money, I think, continues to rule the world. So if there's money to be made in this, and it happens to be a way that helps people a little bit, great. Of course, it can't help them too much, because then they don't need our drug anymore, and then they won't help us make revenue to pay back our backers. So only help them a little bit. But I think that it's a combination of those things: access, knowledge, money, and like you said, interests, like celebrities talking about it, it gets harder for politicians to ignore it if public sentiment is around it. So podcasts like this, articles, initiatives from city governments and states like Oregon and Colorado, the more momentum there is, the more research is done, the more people's minds change, the harder it is to ignore the obvious truths of the benefits of these medicines.
Mm-hmm. And it's not really a criticism on ayahuasca ceremonies, it's just this current state of things, I think, is that it's basically a wealthy man's or a wealthy person's drug or experience, because not everybody has a passport, not everybody has the capability to go to South America, for example. I mean, there obviously may be things going around under the table here, but a lot of people that might need or want access to that wouldn't have the capabilities to do that. But let's talk about some of the. Well, let me ask you this first, a simple question, because we mentioned a little bit about you mentioned that the dangers are very minimal. Is there any evidence of what is the evidence of bad things happen? I think one of the things that you'd hear from, the stigmatized side of it was, what if you go jump off a cliff when you're on it or something like that?
Yeah, and people can do irresponsible things when they're in an altered state of consciousness, for sure. That's why set and setting are so important. And if you haven't heard those terms before, those are like the two. If you had to know anything about psychedelics, those are the two I'd recommend. So set is your mindset. It's like where you're at mentally in your experience and going into your experience. And then setting is your physical location and surroundings. The example I like to give is I love mushroom journeys. I love live concerts. I know a lot of people love those two together. I've never done them together, and I never will, because I know myself and I know that's not something that appeals to me. When I'm communing with mushrooms, I want to be in nature, solitude, either on my own or with a very small group of trusted people. I don't want to be at a festival where I don't know who's around me, I'm getting bumped and someone spills beer on my shoe. It just doesn't sound enjoyable to me. People love it, awesome, great. Everyone's kind of different, and that's what's so tricky about these medicines is it's not as simple as the current system. It's like you go to your doctor, they give you 2 pills, everyone's the same, you go home, you take them, you get 10% better. It's like some people like me, out in nature every 4 months. Some other people I know that have their own wonderful practice every 2 weeks at home in their apartment by themselves. Other people I know I'll only do it with a trained therapist on a couch, with a blanket on and headphones. So none of those are wrong. It's a matter of knowing yourself and a bit of experimentation to find, your edges and what you like and what you don't like. So yes, if you go in not knowing set and setting, not knowing anything about what the experience is going to be like, or if someone gives you these without your consent and without your knowledge, then it's possible you'll end up in a very uncomfortable situation, and people do things to escape uncomfortable situations. So it's really, in my opinion, nothing to do with the medicines themselves. It's the set and the setting, and it may be someone else's set and setting inappropriately interfering with yours. It may be a lack of prep on my own account. It depends, but I think it doesn't fall on the medicines themselves. Is my thought.
Yeah, so basically people should be responsible, which is probably more than we have time to cover all today. But let's be responsible ourselves, and let's just look at it for a second, because one of the things that really bothers me is that I feel like in America, and Alaska is a huge microcosm of this, is that we can't see ourselves in the mirror right in front of us, meaning that, I'm not saying that there's no danger at all to using psychedelics. I'm not saying what I would like to say is that that it's nowhere near that how the stigma represents them. And then if you were to put them on a scale and compare it to alcohol in Alaska, in the United States, wherever, but we keep it here, Alaska, United States, alcohol causes so much harm. And I'm not saying that nobody has a good time or that every time that it's bad. I don't want to get into that discussion. What I want to say is that and I don't have all the statistics right here, but anybody can look them up in any state, any city, pretty much anywhere you go, but especially here in Alaska, alcohol causes a hell of a lot of harm. I mean, I'd almost be willing to drop the F-bomb on the podcast for that. It drops a lot. The scale wouldn't even, I mean, the scales wouldn't even be in the same universe.
Yeah.
It would just.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I'm a big logic person. I always have been. Like, it's just how my brain works. And it is completely illogical. A common argument that's made, really the only one, is we don't know how safe these are, and that's why they're still illegal. Meanwhile, like you said, alcohol, how many people die in a drunk driving related incident every day? Probably since we've started talking, there's been more alcohol related deaths, or from over drinking, dying that way. There's been more in the last 40 minutes than have ever died from psychedelics in the history of psychedelics. Like, it's just not a logical argument, and it is the only ground to stand on it, and apparently it still works. And the problem with that, one of the problems is alcohol is the same, what I said for psychedelics. It can be great. It just needs to be used the setting. It's understanding how much is over drinking, knowing when to stop, having the tools and experiences and support system to know not to get in the car. And all that comes with education and society accepting that it's a reality, which, now there's alcohol everywhere. Like, there's minors drinking. There's really no enforcement of it. I believe there should be much more education around it. And, there are countries around the world where you can start drinking. I think the age of 5 is in a European country is when you can start drinking wine legally. There's a lot of more that needs to be done beyond acceptance of it in terms of proactivity. And we can't even get to the stage of acceptance with psychedelics. So it's not surprising that every once in a while you hear a story there was one a couple weeks ago, last week, of a pilot that took mushrooms a couple days before and then didn't sleep for 40 hours, which to me is the more frightening part of that story. It's also mushrooms, it's a 6-hour experience. 48 hours before is going to do absolutely nothing to you 2 days later. But it's a catchy headline. People are going to click it, and now people are going to think mushrooms are terribly dangerous. We can't pass these local policies. We can't allow it. They're unsafe. And meanwhile, in the time they read that, how many deaths related to alcohol abuse? So there's no logic in what we're doing, which goes back to what we talked about before. It begs the question, why? Why are people so invested? Why are people in power so invested in this remaining the status quo?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, you could even draw a parallel with marijuana if you go back to the Harry J. Anslinger stuff, from the early 1900s, and it's a very interesting thing for me, and we'd never be able to get to the heart of it today. But it's very interesting how human beings or Americans, how we can be told something a long, long time ago, and we just stick with it forever. We don't ever change our perspective despite the evidence. And you could say that for both alcohol, psychedelics, marijuana. People tend to look at them the same way as they always have.
And what's really funny is the thing that does help you change that perspective that is rooted in your brain: psychedelics. That's one of the main things it's known for. The analogy I love is if you think of your opinions and brain being a sled track on a snowy hill, the more you go down the same track, the deeper and deeper those grooves get. Every once in a while, if you want to change that up, you need some fresh snow to come in so you can carve a new track. And that's what a psychedelic experience does. It brings in that fresh snow, which can be intimidating and uncomfortable, but is often needed. And that's why every 4 months or so is when I kind of go for my mental health reset, figure out what what habits of the past 4 months, what things I've been doing that maybe don't align with who I want to be and what I want to stand for.
Yeah, and one of the problems I have in the field of social work, for example, is I went to going to grad school. One of the biggest things they hammer down you over and over and over again is evidence-based practice, evidence-based practice, evidence-based practice, evidence-based practice. But yet then you're required to use something like the DSM manual, which the schedule of drugs is not evidence-based. It's just not, and we don't need to get all into that. But it's just one of the issues I have with social work, where just like I said, like with humans or America, we can't see ourselves in the mirror right in front of us. But let's talk about let's stick right here for a second. And it is illegal in a lot of places, depending on what it is and where exactly you're at. But what's the status legally? Like, where are we at in America? And I know that you even mentioned already there's a few different cities and whatnot. Where are we at and where are we going?
Yeah, there are people that know and are a lot more interested in this topic than I am, but I have a general sense just from the work I've done. So outside of the U.S., South America, Central America is very friendly to ayahuasca in particular, and mushrooms in a lot of places, and San Pedro, ibogaine. It depends by country. Some aren't. Just a lot more are relative to the U.S. They built entire industries around it, like the tourism that they get from people coming from all over and from places that they don't have accessibility. Within the U.S., federally, everything still Schedule I, which is the government's designation of the most, the exact terminology I think is super dangerous and no medical benefit. And they're all that, except for ketamine. Ketamine is, I forget, Schedule III maybe, and that's because it's used as an anesthetic. So that's the reason that there are ketamine clinics all over the U.S., and they are doing it off-label. So they're technically using it in a way that it's not meant to be used, not approved by the FDA, when it's being used for mental health reasons. And within that, because it's kind of, like I talked about, there's no education around it, there's no like proactivity, you could get a whole variety of experiences with the ketamine clinics, where it could be a dingy basement that's super sketchy to a beautiful, high-end luxury resort style feeling. So there's that for ketamine, and then everything else, like domestically, if you know people, there's underground where you can find ayahuasca circles. There's a few churches that technically are operating legally, but every once in a while the government decides they don't care about that and they raid them, and that usually makes the news. Then there are states taking things into their own hands. So Oregon, I believe in 2024, will have psilocybin-assisted therapy be legal, and they're setting up the frameworks for that. They voted on that. Colorado did the same. I think they're 2025. They'll have retreat centers there, all while it's still federally illegal. And then California, unfortunately, just rejected a proposal to decriminalize psychedelics, which means they're still illegal, but they're not going to investigate people. They're not going to put any government resources toward catching people. There's a lot of states that there's a few states that have decriminalized. There's a few cities that have decriminalized within states on their own. So that's kind of where it's at now. And then the other thing I'll add underground is a lot of people just grow their own. You can find out how to do this online. And surprisingly, for how illegal everything is, it's fairly easy to grow your own mushrooms just by doing some research and buying things online. I think it's 48 out of the 50 states. As long as you're doing it for research purposes, then no one's looking into it, then it's legal. So there's a big underground community and people that have their own experiences like I do by either growing their own or having trusted friends that grow and then gift them. So that's kind of the landscape.
Yeah, with you being in a position, I don't want to say position, but you're in a, you have some different roles that kind of give you a little bit of power and as far as influence or presenting material to people and whatnot. How do you deal with I'm sure it's something you've thought about, but how do you balance the ethics of something when it's illegal, even if you believe it shouldn't be illegal, and you're talking to other people and advising them? Obviously we don't want, either of us, I'm sure, don't want to give somebody some advice that's going to get them arrested or get them in trouble, right? Because even when we speak about the DSM and stuff, that's one of the categories, right? You get arrested or have a criminal charge. So how do you balance the ethics of dealing with things that are, the legality is muddled? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I follow my own moral compass. I am very confident in my own ethical practice, and in some ways that lines up with what is legally considered. In my opinion, the law is what we as a society have deemed ethical and unethical. So in some ways that lines up with current law, and in some ways it doesn't. So I follow my own moral compass, and I also balance that with, I don't want to end up in jail or sued or having to deal with that headache. So I do what feels right to me with an understanding of what is legal and not legal, and taking all that into consideration. And then from there, everything's situational. I make the best choice I can with the information that's in front of me.
I was reading about, this was a while back, probably in the early 2010s, but Dr. Gabor Mate, I had read about that he was facilitating, I think it was alcohol treatment with ayahuasca in Canada with mostly indigenous First Nation peoples, and it had extremely positive results, and the government came and shut him down. And I think, so I couldn't find any more information on it this was back when I was in grad school. It just had vanished from the face of the earth. And I think what I had found out was that the government came and told him that shut it down, and if you don't talk about it anymore, we won't bother you, we won't charge you or anything like that. And so he wasn't able to discuss the results of it or anything like that. But what are some of the, do you have any insight or any stories or just information that you can share with some of the research that's been done, some of the positive outcomes? Like Michael Pollan covers several things like end of life, depression, things like that. How are they being used, and what evidence do we have, clinically and whatnot, that they're successful or that they can have positive results?
Yeah, for sure. And take my answer with a grain of salt, because I'm not a big research guy when it comes to this, because I've experienced it and I know it. So every study that comes out, I'm like, yeah, not surprising. That's what these do. But I know a lot of people are research based. I personally think humans have fallen too in love with the scientific method and science, because there's so much of our world and universe that's not science and we cannot explain. So I think we owe ourselves a little more balance to the mystical and the unseen, but research is still important for sure. Did you know that Alcoholics Anonymous was started as LSD? They took LSD and it cured their alcoholism, and then they could no longer do that, so it turned into, that was the start of the 12-step program. So now LSD has been removed from the equation, and it still helps a ton of people, but it got its roots in LSD, and you can read about that. It's pretty fascinating. I don't think a lot of people know that. And then, when it comes to research, mixed with kind of the horizon, MDMA is in some phase 3 trials with the FDA, which assuming they will go well, which all of them have to date, and I'm sure the next ones will too. And I think next year we could see legal MDMA federally, which should come with it being removed from Schedule 1. Skeptical until it happens, but we'll see. And then mushrooms, I think, are a year or two after that. So that's what's kind of cooking in the U.S. And then otherwise, there are a lot of studies from the 70s and from the last 10, 15 years that go into eating disorders, alcoholism, end of life, PTSD, depression, anxiety, and there's all different types of evidence for all of these with all different types of medicine. And when it comes to my opinion, it's everyone is different, everyone's situation is different, what everyone is trying to heal within themselves is different. So if I am trying to heal OCD, it might be psilocybin that is really the thing that moves the needle for me, and someone else for their OCD, it might be an ayahuasca experience. Like, I think the medicines are working at an intelligence that's much higher than ours, and we're just kind of like throwing darts in the dark and trying to figure it out and like moving very incrementally. So that's why my like general suggestion is like for people to do their own research, figure out what's comfortable for them, what calls to them on some higher level, and then do everything they need to feel comfortable and confident that that's the direction. And that can be, and I think should be, a mix of yoga, journaling, meditation, breathwork practices, and then possibly some plant medicines in that equation. And I can share like my own personal equation, which I'd be shocked if anyone's is exactly the same as mine. There might be some similar ones. I do what I call a therapy night once a week, where I'll smoke some cannabis, I'll do yoga, I'll do breath work, I'll journal, and I feel very anxious if I don't do that once a week. Kind of sets my tone. Then every 4 months, like I mentioned, roughly, it really depends on like when I can fit it into my life, is a mushroom journey. I've had one ayahuasca experience about 2 years ago. I'll probably go next year. So who knows if that's like, every 3-ish years, or if it's just like some people with one and done, some people never want to or have any desire to do ayahuasca, have an experience. So it's really just so different for everyone. And I agree with you. I think the DSM is not great, to put it nicely. And I don't like when people use like the word disorder for something they have. I think it's like the language is so important. I think it like does a disservice to yourself and your higher self and who you are. So yeah, all that to say, like, everyone's different, every medicine is different. The research is great for all of them in a variety of capacities. So it's really a matter of finding what works for you. And I'll add one more thing. Ibogaine is one that I know I'm never going to do. I had open heart surgery when I was a kid, and there's scientific evidence. One reason research is important, that shows that Ibogaine can be tough on the heart. So it's just something that's like, even if I thought it could be a value for me, I'm just going to play it safe on this one. And like, I'm comfortable with that. I'm at peace with that. So yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah, well, we have a comment in the chat from Minnie. She says, interesting thought. Peyote eaten in the ritual context enables the individual to commune with God and the spirits, including those of the departed, in contemplation and vision, and so to receive from them spiritual power, guidance, reproof, and healing. Native American church practices this and even have ceremonies. And I think it's an interesting topic because peyote is something that I'd heard about a long time ago, and it's kind of like in a, like an outlandish kind of way, affiliated with Native Americans. And the idea was that it was legal and that they could hallucinate and things like that. And then I remember I don't know if you ever seen the movie Young Guns, but they consume peyote in there and all sorts of things happen. But you have any insight on that? I don't know much about the history of it. I just know that it had been legalized, I think, among the Navajo, maybe, in churches, but I'm not that familiar with it. Do you know anything?
I know, and yeah, Minnie, I totally agree. I haven't like heard this specifically, but I 100% believe it. It sounds very in line with plant medicines. And so what I do know is peyote is mescaline. San Pedro is also mescaline. That's kind of like the active ingredient. Michael Pollan's show, How to Change Your Mind, on Netflix, did an episode on mescaline, and he talked about peyote is being poached and like overused and may go extinct, and it's very sacred to Native American churches and communities. So basically, like, don't use it. And that's been my opinion on it for as long as I've known about peyote. Basically, is like it's for Native communities to use. It's not for anyone else to use. And like Ibogaine, I think that's fair. I've accepted that I will never do peyote, and I'm cool with that. Mescaline in San Pedro. San Pedro is super common, like in California, Southern California here. It just grows on the side of the sidewalk. Anyone could just go cut off a branch of the cactus, make it yourself. I don't recommend that because if not prepared well, it can be a very uncomfortable experience. I've had a few San Pedro ceremonies recently, and I forgot to mention it's kind of worked its way into my routine about twice a year. And I have a facilitator that was trained indigenously conduct a ceremony for me. They brew it. It takes every 2 hours. They have to stir it for 3 days. They get up. They take shifts in the middle of the night, and that's how they brew the medicine as they claim, and I believe the medicine tells them it wants to be brewed. So yeah, peyote, a no-go for non-Native Americans as far as I've learned, but a wonderful medicine from everything I've heard. And the same active ingredient is in San Pedro, and San Pedro is one of those psychedelics that's like lower on the radar. A lot of people probably haven't even heard of it. So there's not a lot of research, and it's difficult to find a San Pedro retreat. It's not as popular as ayahuasca, but they do exist. South Central America, they have them legally, and similarly to ayahuasca in the U.S., there's underground webs that provide ceremonies and do it ethically, and yeah.
Right on, thank you. And just speaking to the audience, so if you have any more questions or you want to call in, feel free. I just have a couple more questions before I want to give some time over to August. I just want to return back to where we left off with your story with Empathic Health. I was wondering if you could just tell us about it, what it is, what it has been, how it morphed into Empathic Society, and just some reflections on it. I know I received an email from you, so feel free to talk about whatever you want to talk about.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Artistic freedom. For 2 years it was a peer support community. So we had events, we had weekly integration circles. We were just friends, really, that had something in common. And most of the time we didn't even talk about psychedelics, just hung out as friends. And then the core reason it's not around in the same way it was for the past 2 years, and I say that because a lot of us are still in touch with each other, like lifelong friendships were made. It's just the platform is no longer there. The online forum component it was very high touch. I was doing it full time with savings that I had, and I invested a very large percentage of that into the community and making it come into existence and keeping it going. And it was very high touch. There was a few volunteers that were also very engaged, spending a lot of their time and energy and money on it, and it was free. So there was no money coming in, there was only money going out, and everything that exists in nature needs recycling, so there needs to be flow in both directions. And we just weren't set up that way, and we got to a point that we couldn't bring in the money we needed to keep going the output. So when we started to realize that, that's when the idea for the nonprofit came up, to be able to reduce the outflow and kind of prolong the life of this idea, and yeah, to be able to keep it going while we kind of enter this next stage of the empathic life.
Yeah, right on. Well, one of the things that I've been curious about forever is, well, not forever, but since I've known about Empathic Health and you, and that I never quite wrapped my finger around, and it's almost concerning for me that I didn't explore it further, because it's so connected to what I'm doing personally and research-wise with talking circles. But what is an integration circle? What's the purpose, and how do they work?
Yeah, good question. I love integration circles. I've been to probably like 200-ish at this point, and not only have I never had a bad one, I've never even had like a mediocre one where I was like, that was fine. Like, they've all been like, I'm so happy I went to this. An integration circle can be a lot of things. I've gone to some that were not run by Empathic, that are 20, 40, 80 people in a Zoom room and one facilitator. And those, as you might expect, they're usually an hour long, almost all of them. It's just that person kind of talking at you and giving some probably helpful some advice and resources on ways to integrate. And what integrate is everything that happens outside of the psychedelic experience. So in the psychedelic experience, you have lessons, messages, there's this altered state of consciousness, there's a lot going on, there's a lot to digest, and you don't just end that experience being like, oh, I get it, like all that made sense. When I talked to God there, like I get what they were saying. Like, nature speaks in symbols and omens, and some things take years to be like, oh, that's why that happened 8 years ago. I'm sure we've all had experiences like that, connections being made. So the integration is what you do all the time. You're not doing the psychedelic. So helpful tips that you might get in one of those 80 people circles is how to do a journaling practice, and how to get started meditating if you don't, or helpful meditation app, anything like that. Helpful. The way we do our integration circles there's never more than 8 people in one, and there's always a trusted facilitator. And when I say trusted, like, there's no real, people aren't coming out with bachelors in psychedelic training, not yet. So it's kind of like vetting people, just talking to them, like, can we trust you to hold this space, create this container, so that the 8 people that show up, or up to 8 people, can feel comfortable and have someone to kind of guide, conversation and respond thoughtfully if no one else knows how to reply. So that's always how we've done ours, which those 8 people that are showing up were already people that were in our community, and everyone that joined in our community was vetted as well. So there was a very high level of trust and safety that when you showed up to one of these, you could talk about anything and know that you have whatever you want. Support, people to listen, people to offer their feedback and opinions and advice. And that led to really high quality conversations every week, because we set up the containers in that way. So both the 80-person one and the 8-person one are integration circles, but as you can tell, the experience and what you're going to walk away with are significantly different.
Yeah, and I just want to give you props for for integrating the integration circles or interweaving them into what you got going on. It's something that I truly believe in, and if I've learned one thing as a social worker that's worked with real troubled populations, is that almost all of the individuals that I've come across, they have a lot to say. People that I thought wouldn't, want to talk to me or wouldn't want to participate in something like a talking circle, they may not. I'm not saying they jumped right into it, but almost 100% of if not 100%, but almost 100% of the people really have stuff that they're holding on inside and they don't feel like they've had somebody to talk to and share. And so the fact that you have that in there and you have the philosophy and the ideas behind it that you do, I just want to commend you and give you big props for that. So respect what you're doing or what you've been doing, Doug. And I'll come back to you in a minute, but I want to turn it over to August. So I think we have technical difficulties. So you can either go without a face and we can just have you on the mic, or you can switch places with me, whatever you want.
I can just speak.
Go ahead. It's all yours.
So my questions?
Yeah.
Okay. So my question, or maybe you can give me some feedback.
Your mic a little, put it down by your head. Just push it down. There you go.
Okay. So more like feedback or your
I can't really hear too well.
Is that better?
Try now. I turned it up.
Bit.
Okay, is that better?
It's a little better.
Okay, is that better?
Same.
Hmm.
Not hearing it? I can hear you.
Okay. So, do you, well, I'm not really asking a question, or maybe some feedback on the U.S. Army and the testing that they did with marijuana, cocaine, heroin, opiates, barbiturates, and they were using them as testing for drug weapons from the 50s through the 60s.
So the U.S. Army testing drugs in the 50s and 60s. That's the. Did I hear that right?
Yes, as drug weapons.
Right, like psychological warfare stuff.
Right.
Right. You want to know my thoughts on it?
Yeah. Or do you have any knowledge or background information regarding that?
No, not really. I think MK Ultra was the name of the study, like the big one that people like made it into pop culture. I might be completely wrong on that, but my thoughts are it's not surprising that the government will try and turn anything into a weapon. It's not surprising that it didn't work to control people's minds. I think those are my two main takeaways from that. And it is something that, like, also not surprisingly, is pretty well swept under the rug.
Right, and I think they even started to doing some testing back in the 1940s, and I think now they do use, like you were saying earlier, MDMA, known as ecstasy, to help people with depression and PTSD. And then my next question to you is, do you know of any studies that use psychedelics in geriatric clinics to treat people, stroke victims, people with dementia or Alzheimer's?
Great question. No, I don't know of any. My feeling is that is not in existence. And my feeling is I would love for that to be in existence. Especially really any end of life or near end of life care. And I know the big thing right now in the biopharma world is Alzheimer's. Like anytime there's and this is a bit of my finance background speaking, anytime there's a company that might have a cure or advancement in Alzheimer's, that company skyrockets in stock price because it's such a huge dilemma that our society is facing. And just knowing what I do about psychedelics, like I would not be surprised if there's some psychedelic or combination that would significantly help in this space. Like I believe they're, if not the only medicines we need, like they should be a very high percentage of the medicines we need. And this is getting off topic, but a lot of the medicines we do use are really, the active ingredients are trees and plants, and that's where they're coming from anyway. So to bring it back, no, I don't think there's really anything going on right now. I would love for it to. Personally, like my grandfather is nearing his transition into the unseen world, and I've asked him a few times. He's a pharmacist, funny enough, or he was, and I've told him, I was like, if you want mushrooms, like I can help you out. Like they have been known to make the transition significantly more comfortable, and he's shooed me off every time nicely. So of course respecting his wishes, but yeah, I'm a big believer in because these medicines are communicating and in touch with that unseen world, that there's that they help humans with the transition and coping with it and understanding. And you may have heard stories of people having an ego death, dying while taking psychedelics. I think that's what this is. And there's an old, I think, Greek saying, if you die before you die, then you never die. And that's this sentiment that if you can experience what death might be like and understand it's not as horrifying as our culture makes it out to be, then you can kind of live renewed, knowing that the one thing that's inevitable is not that bad, and you can really enjoy life and kind of get that new, fresh perspective. So I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, thank you. So I did do a quick Google research as you were speaking. I have a parent who is a stroke victim and lives in a care facility. And I guess there is research for psychedelic and brain injury. And you can search it up on National Institute of Health.gov.
Very cool.
And then there is Johns Hopkins University. Phantom psychedelic healing, adjunct therapy, and then it just kind of continues on from there.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So I was wrong. That's great to hear.
I want to just, if I can just add real quick, because I was doing the same thing that August was doing. I was looking it up, and the Johns Hopkins ones, it says that specific research regarding like Alzheimer's and dementia and whatnot hasn't been conducted as of yet. It is on the radar, and researchers at Johns Hopkins are studying psilocybin, a psychoactive substance found in certain kinds of shrooms, to see whether it can help people with depression and Alzheimer's disease when administered in a safe and supportive setting. It looks like they're in the process of putting that together, so it is on the radar.
That's good to hear.
You got anything else, August?
No, thank you. But thank you so much for your sharing your experiences and giving us time today to listen to you and change our way of thinking on the research into psychedelics.
Yeah, I appreciate your questions, August. And I want to add, because I'll beat myself up later if I don't, because I almost never call this out. As I mentioned before, I think language is really important, and I think the term shrooms really lends itself to like this hippie festival, like psychedelics are a party drug type of like nomenclature. So I want to be better myself at gently pointing this out to people when I hear it used, and I had to retrain myself, because I used to say shrooms as well, to say mushrooms or plant medicines whenever I'm speaking about them. So if that lands with anyone, great. If not, do what you want to do, but I wanted to speak my piece on it.
Yeah, I actually listened to a podcast a long time ago, and I think it was Joe Rogan, but I can't be sure. I haven't listened to him in like a decade, but it was a long time ago. And he had, what's his name? What's the two brothers that are into psychedelics forever, and the one died a while back?
Oh, it's McKenna, Dennis and Terrence McKenna.
Dennis. It had Dennis on there. Terrence is dead, right? It had Dennis on there. And he was taking the topic of mushrooms very, very seriously, and talking about it, in a critically reflective way. And Rogan had one of his buddies on, one of his comedian buddies, I don't know his name, but he just kept going off about like shroom parties and they had like shroom pajama parties or something, and he was just really pissing McKenna off. And I empathize with McKenna, because he was trying to reduce the stigma so folks would look at it critically, from a better perspective. So I appreciate you bringing that up, and I think that does add to the stigma. And you hear people that are talking down on it, those are the terms that they use it more than the other side, if that makes sense, a lot of the time.
And yeah, thanks for the acknowledgement. Yeah, I hear people like both ways. Even people that talk about it super fondly, and that's just like, how they've heard it. And I imagine it's to differentiate it from other mushrooms, which makes sense. But they're all mushrooms at the end of the day. Like, we don't got to abbreviate one over the other, right? So yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah. Let's see, we got a comment from Savannah. I'll read it real quick. From personal experience working as a CNA prior to switching degree paths, I've witnessed patients being given some type of the pill with end-stage
THC.
cancer and Alzheimer's patients.
Yeah, that's cool. I didn't know that was a thing. THC, I think, falls in the same boat. It's also a plant medicine. And like I mentioned in my therapy nights, like I use cannabis intentionally there. I think it's a great way to strengthen the connection you have with your higher self, which is what all these plant medicines are getting at. So that's cool to hear. I'm curious if you saw anything like with the people that had them, Savannah, like with the people that had the THC pill, if there was, how they responded to it, if there was any difference between people that didn't.
Let me see if Savannah chimes back in. Another thought, I had about, connecting marijuana and psychedelics and how they're represented is, you often hear the same thing with marijuana, and I think a good example, if anybody's ever seen like what is it called, Real Time with Bill Maher or something, the Bill Maher show, whatever it is, on HBO. Well, he often talks about how he uses marijuana, right? But the way that he talks about it is that like this bombastically that everyone that smokes marijuana sits on the couch and eats Cheetos, which is obviously not true if he's talking about himself. He's he obviously has to work very hard to be a stand-up comedian and have a live show once a week in addition to that. And so I just think that even from, the side that seems to be pro, they still oftentimes, it often gets talked about in such a way that doesn't reflect the reality. I'm not saying nobody sits on the couch and eats Cheetos and smokes marijuana. Surely they do. But certainly not everybody that partakes in such a thing. And we have plenty of evidence, even in our own experiences. Most people should have evidence that that's not true.
100%. Like, something I've never understood, people, it's a common known thing, people get the munchies, there's even a term for it, when they have cannabis. And that's another one, just while I'm on the topic. Marijuana was a term made by the government to make cannabis sound like it was coming from Central and South America, to make it sound foreign so people would stop doing it. So that's another one I've tried to root out of my vocabulary.
Even changed it from an H to a J to make it sound Mexican.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, so I go with cannabis now and weed. So with the cannabis, it suppresses my appetite significantly. I have no interest in eating for a while after my therapy nights, which is obviously uncommon, but goes to show that these medicines work for everyone differently. I used to exclusively use sativa strains, and indica would make me very paranoid. Now I'm the opposite. I exclusively use indica, and sativa makes me very paranoid. A very dynamic medicine. It's very stereotyping to say it's for eating Cheetos and lounging on the couch, which I'm sure some people do. I'm sure 99% of people don't. It'll get jokes and it'll get laughs, I should say. So it's inevitable.
Mm-hmm. Savannah did answer. She said, yes, one patient was laughing, cutting up jokes, and pointing out various things, legit, just enjoying his last few days rather than lying in pain and suffering. His cancer was spread throughout his entire body, so you can only imagine how that individual felt on a daily basis outside of what we observe as caretakers.
Yeah, that's joyous to hear that he was able to be in that state and still be laughing, joking, legit enjoying. I hope more people can have that experience when they're in similar situations.
All right. Well, we're running towards the end of the time on our podcast, and I always like to get real critical towards the end. And something that I've been thinking about that I think is worth a quick discussion is so in recent months, it's been a little while, but like 6 months or so ago, I started receiving emails about having ketamine delivered at home, and I can't remember all of it, but and then you hear other stories of they're going to market microdosing and different things like that, and psilocybin. And from my perspective, and again, I'm no expert, but from my perspective, when it comes to psychedelics, the whole spirit of the idea behind the plant medicines seem to be the antithesis to like corporations. And I wonder what your thoughts are in that direction. Is how do those things coalesce with each other? The changing landscape of how we talk and feel and think about psychedelics or plant medicines, and then the fact that now that it's becoming more accepting, there's money to be made, right? And so how does that change things if somebody were to buy their psilocybin mushrooms from a corporation, for example, versus, like you mentioned, people grow them or receive them more organically from connections or whatnot. Like how does that change the landscape? And do you see that as an issue, or do you think that with the nature of the plant medicines, the psychedelics, that they'll work themselves out?
Yeah, awesome question. I have paradoxical viewpoints on this. In the long run, my hope is that it's community-based healing. Colorado is headed this way with the work they're doing that'll start in a couple of years, where you go to a community healing center, you have your experience with neighbors and friends and family, and then maybe there's integration services that they can provide, or maybe companies spring out to fill those gaps of the between, but it really reduces and hopefully eventually eliminates this whole big pharma powerhouse that's set up of advertising all these new drugs you didn't know you needed, and just the chaos that is big pharma currently. The way I imagine big pharma would like it to play out, and how the path they're taking is like, we control health, so if these things can help with health, then let's make sure that we preserve the power by controlling them. So government keeps it illegal, big pharma maybe lobbies to help make that happen, then big pharma can run these trials, they can get their drugs approved, and then they can patent these drugs. But of course, how do you patent a mushroom that grows in cow poop and on wood? So, all right, we go into the lab, we make one small tweak to it, and now we have a novel substance that we made as a company, and anyone that uses it, we can sue. So now we have this new substance that we altered. We can have you come in to your doctor, he'll give you 2 pills of the new mushroom thing that we advertised about, then you go home and take it like any other pill. And as we talked about the last 2 hours, not how these psychedelics are meant to work. And big pharma continues to make money, and people are slightly healthier than they were. I balance that with anything is progress feeling of these medicines are a lot more intelligent than us. So even if it's some, different form of them, if it's getting to people that otherwise wouldn't be having them, and a lot of people that won't take anything unless it's a doctor that's prescribing it, then that is the next step in the ladder. And maybe that leads people to realize, like, oh, I can, do this however I want in nature, at a concert, whatever. So it kind of like provides that next step on the path. So yeah, the two sides I'm balancing are like progress is progress in my opinion. And and also like the money in power is gonna try and keep the money in power, and that means people not actually getting healthy. Because why would we need pharmacology companies if people are actually healthy? There's no reason to pay them and drive their bottom line, which is what they legally have to care about. The one big thing I learned as working in finance is if companies are not trying to make the most money possible, they can be sued for not doing that. So they are not allowed to prioritize. A health company cannot prioritize their patient's health. They have to prioritize making the most money possible, which inherently means not prioritizing your patient's health enough that they have to keep coming back to you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Doug. All right. Well, as we wrap up today's episode, I want to I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to Doug for sharing your insightful journey, shedding light on the transformative potential of psychedelics and integration circles. It's truly been a profound dialogue, and I hope it resonated with the audience as much as it has with me. I think that your stories and your experiences have added a beautiful layer of understanding to the complex realm of psychedelics, or plant medicines, and personal transformation. And mostly I want to thank you for your openness and the work you've done through Empathic Health and Empathic Society. And I feel like, I was introduced to Doug through a friend back on Oahu when I was living in Hawaii. And I learned a lot and took a lot from the little bit of time that I spent with what was Empathic Health at that time. So I just want to say to you, Doug, that I feel like I feel like I have a major debt or anything, but I feel like I could give back if you ever have any opportunities in any way that you feel like I could extend any help or services. I'm here for you. I'd be happy to help.
Yeah, thank you so much for that offer. I really appreciate it. And I was just talking to that mutual friend, funny enough, earlier today. That's cool. I didn't put that together until you just said that. Thanks for letting me come on and rant some of my opinions and truths. And it was a pleasure. Thank you for doing this podcast and creating this podium for people to get their word out.
Yeah, it was a pleasure, Doug. And August, Michelle, and I were just having this discussion before about who can be, deemed a social worker or whatnot. And one of the things I've had on the show, and I have folks that don't have a background in professional social work, that I would like to crown you, Doug, revolutionary social worker. So I can't put the crown on your head. That's what I'm doing. I believe that you do revolutionary social work, and I just wanted to say thank you.
I'm honored. My mom is a licensed social worker. Will be both thrilled and annoyed that she had to go through schooling.
All right, and to August, Michelle, thank you so much for your thoughtful engagement and contributions to today's dialogue. Again, like I said earlier, I've enjoyed having you as a student, but it's been a pleasure working with you the last week or two, and it's been a pleasure having you with me here in the office and on the podcast. And I just wanted to ask, you have any last words?
No, I don't, but I would like to thank everyone that participated today, and thank you, Professor Chris, for your support for not only myself, but the rest of the students.
Yeah, thank you. All right, and to our audience, to echo August, your active participation and thoughtful questions and comments always enrich our discussion and make it a lively and insightful dialogue. So thank you for tuning in and being a part of the exploratory journey. Looking forward, I'm thrilled to announce next week I'll have Dr. John, I'm not even sure how to pronounce his last name because I've never heard it said, I've only read it, but I think it's John Hausdorfer, and he goes by Dr. John. He's an environmental philosopher, teacher, and writer from Gunnison, Colorado. Dr. John is deeply invested in exploring the interconnection between environmental health and social justice. His book, What Kind of Ancestor Do You Want to Be?, which I should have brought it out, but it's in my backpack. It delves into the core of being responsible inhabitants of this planet, transcending the superficial distinctions that often divide us. We'll engage with Dr. John on the essential topic of being a good ancestor and the concept of kinship, explaining how we can foster a deeper connection with the world around us and pave a path of healing and justice. I think this would be a thought-provoking dialogue. I'm really stoked, just as I was to talk with Doug today. Dr. John's going to be great, so I'm really looking forward to talking with him. So mark your calendars. That's next Thursday, 7 a.m. Alaska time. do the math and figure it out if you're in a different time zone. Again, participation is highly encouraged, so join us live if you can. You can catch our live sessions through this Riverside studio, and you can later find us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever there's podcasts. Search for us and you'll find us. So you can stay connected with us by following the UAF Social Work page on Facebook and following me and my wife's production organization called A Conscious Party on Instagram. So until next time, everyone, continue to engage in critical dialogue, reflect on your practices, and always keep the revolutionary spirit alive. Thank you, and we'll see you next Thursday. This episode of The Critical Social Worker was recorded live on Thursday, November 2nd. Today's episode featured Doug Finkelstein and was hosted by Christian and August Michelle. Brought to you by the University of Alaska Fairbanks, Department of Social Work. This has been a Conscious Party production. You've been listening to The Critical Social Worker, a revolutionary storytelling podcast. Your story, my story, our story. Until next time, keep being revolutionary. Peace, everyone. Take care.